I've been listening to Queen for decades now. There's something about Brian May's playing that is just so different. It just never gets old. It took me years to understand what it was, but I finally got it. It was really surprising. So like many kids growing up in the 90s, the first time I really paid attention to Queen was because of this scene in Wayne's World. It's a classic scene that brought Bohemian Rhapsody to the ears of a whole generation. So that was my way in, and the first time I heard the solo, I was blown away. It was just so different than anything I had heard before. See, for me, a solo was basically the guitar player coming up front and playing something with the band supporting him. It was just all about the lead player. Now, this was different. It was super melodic. It used some sounds that I had not heard before, and I wanted to understand because I wanted to play that way. So with the very little experience I had at the time, it was 1993, I had just picked up the guitar. I knew a few chords. I barely knew the minor pentatonic scale. So I did the only thing I knew it to do, which was to try to find the tabs and learn that solo. That was a big challenge. Because at the time, you can do a Google search to find tabs, or maybe you could, it was really the early days, but you would not find a good tab at the time. So really, there were two options. I could wait for the new issue of Guitar Player magazine to come out, hoping that the song I wanted to learn was featured in there, or ask my local guitar teacher. So that's what I did. I showed up to my next guitar lesson with Bohemian Rhapsody's tape in one hand, my guitar in the next, and asked my teacher, hey, can you please teach me this solo? So he manually wrote down what he could figure out from the solo of Bohemian Rhapsody. I went back home, tried to learn from it, listening to the cassette tape, looking at the tabs that the teacher had written down. Looking back, my teacher was not that good, so it was not super accurate. But it kind of resembled that solo, so I just would practice this day in, day out, just Bohemian Rhapsody solo over and over and over and over. That didn't help. I got good at playing a lamer version of the real solo, but I didn't understand what was going on. See, in the past, when I wanted to incorporate something I heard into my playing, I would fit that into a system that I was familiar with, the pentatonic scale, for example. In this case, like I said earlier, it did not work because Brian was not following that conventional box. And that was really weird because most of the songs I had learned could all fit somehow that minor pentatonic scale. So I thought to myself, well, maybe it's just that Brian is using different scales that I hadn't learned yet. So I got to work. I would study anything I could about scales. That was my first exposure to guitar modes. I learned all the positions. I also dabbled a little bit with the harmonic minor mode. Melodic minor, that was too complicated. I read about theory. I even spent most of my free time when I was not at school in the local library reading books about music theory. Honestly, that made no sense at all. I had acquired some mathematical knowledge about scales, had some positions. That in its end was a problem because I would memorize these positions and quickly forget them because I didn't know how to use them. And I spent pretty much decades trying to figure out that missing piece that would help me understand what Brian was doing so that I could do it too. Now here's why this didn't work. I was trying to approach this the typical guitar way, and that's basically learn the song, learn the scales, try to fit the song into the scale, practice it enough so that it becomes second nature. And what I failed to understand at the time is that Brian May is not really a guitar player. When Brian plays, he's not thinking about the guitar. And that's why his solos are so different from anything else I've heard before. Okay, so how does it work? How can we guitar players play in a way that Brian plays, knowing that Brian doesn't really play like a guitar player? See, the answer came to me in a really weird place. It was a couple years ago. I was driving from Fort Collins, Colorado, where I live, to visit my brother, who at the time lived in Kansas. It was about an 8-hour drive, and if you've ever driven that road, it's pretty boring. I mean, there's some cool spots in Colorado, but once you pass that, it's pretty flat. There's nothing, just fields in the middle of nowhere. perfect time to have quality time listening to music. So I put a playlist with all the Queen albums I had, and without realizing, I started singing along. Now, I wasn't only singing Freddie's parts, but I was also singing what Brian May was playing. And I realized that even though Brian was playing guitar, I could sing those lines very easily. Not only because his solos were super memorable, but also because of the placement of the breaths. Wait a minute. I had to put that theory to the test. I skipped to the next song, and yes, I could do it. I could sing every single lick with a single breath. Try the next song, same exact thing. And then the next, yep, it worked too. And that's what I had failed to realize so many years ago when I first heard Bohemian Rhapsody. Brian May is not a guitar player. He's a singer in disguise. He's only using his guitar as a tool to communicate those ideas that are born from his voice. I mean, check this out. This is the solo for Bohemian Rhapsody. See how all those phrases are really short. There are silences that are built into those phrases, giving you the opportunity to breathe in and then say the next phrase. That's how all those lines were born. They were not born from noodling on the guitar. People who do that will typically rely on positions that we've heard over and over. That's never been the case with Brian May. See, if you let the guitar lead your music, it's going to be very locked into typical positions. Your fingers are always going to rely on comfort zones, positions that you've played before, simple things that they know will work, but then you're not really in control of your music and you're not really expressing what you want to express. Now, yes, there are a few moments when Brian lets his fingers do the work, and that just adds a little bit of excitement, but you can really clearly hear the difference letting your fingers run loose on your fretboard and having a more controlled, melodic, composed way of playing guitar. And in the end, it makes a massive difference. The solo is no longer this thing that is held on a silver platter and all the band behind is just supporting what the guitar is playing. The solo is an essential part of the musical experience. When you combine that way of playing with all the licks you already know, your playing is going to be a lot more expressive and you're going to be a lot more fulfilled as a guitar player, expressing those ideas that are deep inside of you. And I'm going to teach you how to do all of that for free. This free workshop will guide you through the whole process. I'll meet you right there.